For years, I thought my marriage was unshakable. Olivia and I had been together for 12 years, raising our two kids, Sophie and Caleb, in what I thought was a happy, ordinary life. Sure, we had our ups and downs. What couple doesn't? But I never imagined how far those downs could go. It started with small, almost imperceptible changes. Olivia became distant. She spent more time at work, her phone glued to her hand like an extension of her body. If I asked about it, she'd shrug and say, "Just emails, Ethan. You know how Lucas is." Lucas Whitman. Her boss-turned-business partner at the boutique marketing firm she helped build. A name I'd heard so many times that it had become a household word. I never thought twice about him, until now. Late one night, as Olivia worked in her office, I walked past and noticed her screen. A message lit up. "I miss our talks. Can we make time tomorrow?" I froze. It was signed Lucas. Olivia quickly closed the laptop when she saw me. "Can't sleep?" she asked casually, as if nothing was wrong. I forced a smile. "Just getting water." But as I walked away, that uneasy feeling began to take root. Something wasn't right. The next morning, the memory of that message still lingered. "I miss our talks." What did that even mean? Olivia had always been close to Lucas, but I'd chalked it up to work camaraderie. Now, every laugh they shared, every late-night brainstorming session, took on a new meaning. I told myself not to overreact. Maybe it was just work, but curiosity got the better of me. Later that evening, while Olivia was putting the kids to bed, I opened her laptop. The screen lit up with her chat history. Most of it was mundane, client updates, marketing strategies. But then I saw a thread labeled Personal, Lucas. I clicked it, my heart racing. The messages weren't explicitly romantic, but they were intimate. "You always understand me better than anyone," one read. "I don't know what I'd do without you." My stomach turned as I scrolled. Then I found a photo, a selfie of Lucas, smiling in a way that felt far too casual for a business associate. And Olivia's response chilled me. "You look amazing. Let's talk tonight." Same time? I slammed the laptop shut, my hands shaking. I wanted to confront her immediately, but the kids were still awake. Instead, I sat in the kitchen, waiting for her to come downstairs. When she finally did, I couldn't hold back. "Olivia," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "are you and Lucas more than just co-workers?" Her eyes widened, and for a split second, I thought she'd deny it. But then she sighed, her shoulders slumping. "It's not what you think," she said softly. "Lucas and we've been talking a lot lately. About work, about life. That's all." "That's all?" I asked, my voice rising. "Because it looks like he's sending you photos, and you're talking to him like he's more than just a colleague." Her face hardened. "You've been snooping through my stuff? Don't turn this on me, Olivia." I snapped. "I saw the messages. Tell me the truth. Are you having an affair?" "No," she shouted, her voice trembling. "It's not an affair, Ethan. We're just close. He's been there for me in ways you haven't." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. What the hell is that supposed to mean? She folded her arms, looking away. "You're always so busy with work and the kids. I feel like I'm invisible sometimes. Lucas listens. He understands me." My heart pounded as anger surged through me. "So what? That makes this okay? You could have talked to me, Olivia." "Not him." Her voice broke. "I tried, Ethan. You didn't listen." I stared at her, the woman I'd loved for over a decade, feeling like I didn't know her at all. "Is this why you've been pulling away?" I asked quietly. "Why you're always working late? Always on your phone?" She didn't answer, and that silence was louder than any confession. The tension between us was unbearable after that night. Olivia refused to acknowledge how deep the connection with Lucas went, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. 2 days later, I decided I couldn't just take her word for it. I needed proof. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I installed a monitoring app on her phone. It felt invasive and wrong, but the growing weight of her secrecy left me no choice. By the end of the week, the app paid off. I was at work, scrolling through my emails, when the app pinged me with a notification. Olivia had sent Lucas a voice note. "I can't stop thinking about what you said. You're right. Things haven't felt the same with Ethan for a long time. I just don't know what to do anymore." I nearly dropped my phone. The message was like a dagger twisting in my chest. I played it again and then again, trying to decipher every tone and word. Was she just venting? Or was this the confirmation I'd been dreading? That evening, As soon as Olivia walked through the door, I confronted her. "Lucas again?" I said sharply. She froze, her coat halfway off. "What are you talking about?" I held up my phone. "I heard the message you sent him." Her face went pale. You're spying on me?" "Don't deflect, Olivia," I shouted. "You said things haven't felt the same with me." "What did he mean by what he said? What are you two planning?" She hesitated, her hands trembling. Then, to my shock, she collapsed into a chair and started crying. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," she sobbed. My stomach dropped. "So it's true?" I whispered. "You've been having an affair." She looked up, shaking her head. "It's not physical, Ethan. I swear. But yes, we've been close. Too close." I told him things I should have told you. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Too close," I repeated, my voice rising. "You're telling another man about our marriage problems and saying you don't know what to do anymore. What do you think that sounds like to me?" She covered her face with her hands. "I didn't mean for it to feel like this," she said. "I was lonely. Lucas listened when I felt like you didn't. And you think that excuses this?" I snapped. "You think that justifies lying to me, hiding things, betraying our family?" She didn't respond, just sat there sobbing. For a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy. But then my anger returned, stronger than ever. "I don't care if it wasn't physical," I said coldly. "You broke my trust, Olivia. And trust is everything." She wiped her tears, her expression hardening. "You haven't been perfect either, Ethan. You're so consumed with work, the kids, everything else. When was the last time you asked how I was feeling?" Her words stung, but I refused to let her turn this around. "So, instead of talking to me, you turned to him? Do you even hear yourself right now?" The silence stretched between us like a canyon, and I realized something. This wasn't just about Lucas. This was about something deeper, something broken between us that neither of us had been willing to confront. And for the first time, I wondered if it could even be fixed. The days after Olivia's confession were like walking through a minefield. I thought the confrontation would bring some clarity, maybe even a chance to repair what was broken. But Olivia had other plans. Instead of showing remorse, she became defensive, turning every argument into a referendum on my faults. One night, as we sat at opposite ends of the living room in tense silence, she suddenly spoke. "You act like you're the perfect husband," she said, her voice sharp. "But maybe if you paid half as much attention to me as you do your job, we wouldn't be here." I froze, her words cutting through me. "You think this is my fault?" She stood up, crossing her arms. "I'm saying it's not as black and white as you make it out to be, Ethan. You're not exactly blameless in all this." Anger surged through me. "You're unbelievable. I'm not the one sneaking around, spilling my heart to another person." Her face twisted with frustration. "And why do you think I had to? You're always too busy or too distracted to notice anything. When was the last time you even asked how my day was?" I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my composure. "Don't you dare turn this on me, Olivia. I've been working my ass off to support this family, to give you and the kids everything you could ever need. And this is how you repay me." Her eyes flashed with something I couldn't quite place. Defiance, maybe, or desperation. "You think money is enough? You think being a good provider makes up for being emotionally absent?" "You still to hear?" Stunned. The person standing in front of me didn't feel like the woman I'd married. "Do you even hear yourself?" I said quietly. "You're blaming me for your decision to betray me. Do you know how insane that sounds?" She opened her mouth to respond, but stopped short. For a moment, I thought she might apologize or try to explain herself. But instead, she said something that left me reeling. "Maybe I'm not the only one who hasn't been honest," she said, her voice cold. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" I demanded. Her eyes narrowed. "You're so quick to judge me, Ethan. But what about you and Mia?" My jaw dropped. "Mia? Are you serious right now?" She crossed her arms, her expression triumphant. "You think I don't see how she looks at you? How much time you spend with her at work?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mia is my co-worker. That's it. I've never once crossed a line with her." "Sure," Olivia said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "But you enjoy the attention, don't you? Don't act like you're completely innocent in all this." Her accusation hit me like a slap. The audacity of it, the way she twisted the situation to make herself the victim. It was almost too much to bear. "You're deflecting," I said finally, my voice trembling with anger. "Because you know what you've done is indefensible." She didn't respond, just stared at me with a mixture of defiance and bitterness. That night, as I lay awake in the guest room, I realized something. Olivia wasn't just unwilling to fix our marriage. She was actively sabotaging it. I couldn't shake the conversation with Olivia. Her accusation about Mia was ridiculous, but the venom behind it stuck with me. It was like she was trying to find an excuse for her behavior, grasping at straws to justify the unjustifiable. But her deflections weren't enough to distract me from Lucas. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them from Olivia. That Friday, I decided to dig deeper into the man who had been at the center of my wife's betrayal. Lucas Whitman wasn't just Olivia's business partner. He was someone she seemed to trust more than me. I started with his social media, scrolling through pictures of his perfect life. There were photos of him at lavish work events, exotic vacations, and dinners with clients. He seemed polished, successful, and annoyingly charming. But then something caught my eye. A post from 3 years ago, a photo of Lucas standing with another woman at a gala. The caption read, "With my partner in crime, Rachel. Couldn't do it without you." Rachel. The name sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it until I remembered Olivia mentioning a former colleague named Rachel who had abruptly left the firm. The rumor was that she'd moved out of state for a better opportunity. I clicked on Rachel's profile. Her posts were less frequent, but they painted a very different picture. In the months leading up to her departure, she'd shared vague, cryptic updates about feeling betrayed and needing a fresh start. Then I found the one that changed everything. Sometimes, the people you trust the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. Moving on is hard, but necessary. I stared at the screen, my heart racing. Was Rachel another victim of Lucas's charm? I dug deeper, scrolling through old photos, comments, and likes. Then, buried in the comments section of an old post, I found a reply that sent chills down my spine. Someone had written, "You're better off without him, Rachel. He's poison." And Rachel's response? "I know. I just wish I'd seen it sooner." My mind was spinning. If Lucas had done this before, if he'd manipulated and betrayed someone else, then he wasn't just a bystander in my marriage falling apart. He was a calculated, deliberate threat. That night, I confronted Olivia again. "What really happened with Rachel?" I asked, my voice steady but sharp. She froze, her eyes darting away. "What are you talking about?" "Lucas and Rachel," I said. "I know something went down between them before she left the firm, and I want to know what." Olivia's face paled. For a moment, I thought she might deny it, but then she sighed, sinking into a chair. "Rachel was complicated," she said carefully. "She and Lucas were close, too close. It caused problems at work, and eventually, she decided to leave." "Decided?" I repeated, my anger bubbling to the surface. "Or was she forced out because of Lucas?" Olivia didn't answer, but her silence was enough. "You knew," I said, my voice trembling. "You knew what kind of man he was, and you still let him into our lives, into our marriage." "It's not the same," she said weakly. "Lucas isn't like that with me." "Isn't he?" I snapped, because from where I'm standing, it looks like he's doing the exact same thing he did to Rachel. And you're letting him. Her eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't bring myself to care. "You've been lying to me for months," I said coldly. "But you've been lying to yourself even longer. And the worst part? You're dragging me and the kids into this mess." I left the room before she could respond. I didn't need to hear her excuses anymore. That night, I started planning my next move. The more I learned about Lucas, the clearer it became. This wasn't just an emotional affair or a passing flirtation. Something deeper was going on. I decided it was time to take action. I reached out to a private investigator, someone I'd found online with excellent reviews for handling sensitive domestic matters. It felt extreme, but I couldn't trust Olivia to tell me the truth, and I had to protect myself and the kids from whatever else might be lurking beneath the surface. "Keep it discreet," I told the investigator, a middle-aged man named Carl who looked like he'd seen it all. "I need to know everything there is to know about Lucas Whitman and his relationship with my wife." Carl nodded, jotting down notes. "You'll have answers in a week." In the meantime, I focused on my kids. Sophie and Caleb deserved better than the tension that had consumed our home. I made a point to be present, helping with homework, playing soccer in the backyard, and reading bedtime stories. But even in those moments, Olivia's shadow loomed. She'd retreat into her office for hours, claiming she was working late, but I knew better. I'd see her phone light up with notifications, her face flickering with guilt whenever I walked by. Then a week later, Carl called. "I've got something you'll want to see," he said. We met at a small coffee shop, where he handed me a folder filled with documents and photos. My heart pounded as I flipped through them. The first few pages confirmed what I already knew: frequent meetings and dinners between Olivia and Lucas, many of them outside of normal business hours. But then came the bombshell. A photo of Olivia and Lucas, arm in arm, taken 5 years ago at a conference. 5 years ago. I stared at the picture, my mind reeling. 5 years ago, Olivia and I had been going through a rough patch. Caleb had just been born, and I was working overtime to cover our mounting expenses. We'd argued about everything: money, parenting, even intimacy. Carl must have seen the look on my face because he leaned forward, his expression grim. "They've known each other longer than you think," he said. "And it looks like whatever's happening now might have started long before you noticed." The next document made my stomach churn. A series of emails between Olivia and Lucas from 4 years ago. The tone was professional at first, but as I kept reading, it shifted into something more personal, something unmistakably romantic. "I can't stop thinking about you," one email read. "I wish things were different," Olivia had replied. My hands shook as I turned the pages. The final piece was a hotel receipt from 3 years ago. Lucas's name was on it, and so was Olivia's. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. This wasn't just an emotional affair that started recently. Olivia and Lucas had a history, a long, deliberate history that she'd kept hidden from me. When I got home that night, Olivia was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her laptop. She looked up as I walked in, her smile faltering when she saw my expression. "We need to talk," I said, dropping the folder on the table. She hesitated, her eyes darting to the folder. "What's this?" "Evidence," I said coldly, "of just how long you've been lying to me." She opened the folder, her face blanching as she skimmed the contents. "Ethan, it's not what it looks like," she stammered. "Don't," I said, cutting her off. "Don't insult me by pretending this isn't exactly what it looks like. How long has this been going on, Olivia? 5 years? More?" Tears filled her eyes, but I felt nothing. "It wasn't like that," she whispered. "We were close, but it didn't mean anything." "Not really." I laughed bitterly. "It didn't mean anything? You've been lying to me for years, sneaking around with Lucas behind my back, and you have the audacity to tell me it didn't mean anything?" "I was confused," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't know what I wanted, but I never stopped loving you." I shook my head, stepping back. "I can't do this anymore, Olivia. I can't live in a marriage built on lies." As I walked out of the room, her sobs followed me. But for the first time, they didn't make me look back. The days after confronting Olivia felt surreal, like living in a world where nothing made sense anymore. Every time I looked at her, I saw betrayal etched across her face. Every time I saw Lucas's name on anything, emails, messages, I felt my stomach churn. But Olivia wasn't giving up. "You're not thinking clearly, Ethan," she said one evening as I was cleaning up dinner. "We can work through this. Couples survive things like this all the time." I paused, gripping the edge of the sink. "Couples survive mistakes, Olivia. This wasn't a mistake. This was years of deception." Her eyes filled with tears, and she reached for me. "Please, Ethan, think about the kids. They need both of us." I turned to face her, my voice cold. "They needed us to be honest with each other. You threw that away, Olivia." For a moment, she looked like she might argue, but then her expression changed. She looked almost panicked. "There's something you don't know," she said softly. I narrowed my eyes. "What is it now?" She hesitated, her hands trembling. "It's about Caleb." My heart skipped a beat. "What about him?" Her voice wavered. He's not yours." The world seemed to tilt. I stared at her, the words echoing in my head. "What did you just say?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She took a step back, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't mean for it to happen, Ethan. It was a mistake, a one-time thing." "But Lucas is Caleb's biological father." I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, replaying every moment I'd shared with Caleb, his first steps, his first words, the way he'd look at me like I was his hero. "You're lying," I said, my voice trembling. "You're just saying this to hurt me." "I'm not," she said, shaking her head. "I swear, Ethan. I thought it would ruin everything if I told you." And Lucas doesn't know. I never told him either. My chest tightened, and I felt like I might collapse. You kept this from me for 8 years? You let me believe he was my son? I didn't know what else to do, she cried. You're his father in every way that matters, Ethan. You're the one he loves, the one he looks up to. Her words were meant to reassure me, but they only fueled my anger. You stole my right to make a choice, I said, my voice breaking. You stole my right to know the truth about my own family. How the hell am I supposed to forgive that? She didn't respond, just stood there sobbing. But I couldn't look at her anymore. I grabbed my keys and walked out, driving aimlessly through the city as I tried to process what I'd just learned. By the time I returned home, it was late. Olivia was asleep on the couch, and the house was eerily quiet. I went to Caleb's room, standing in the doorway as I watched him sleep. He looked so peaceful, so innocent. He didn't know about any of this. He didn't deserve to have his world torn apart. I sank into a chair, burying my face in my hands. I didn't know what to do, but one thing was clear. I couldn't let this secret destroy Caleb's sense of family. No matter what Olivia had done, I was his father, and I wasn't going to let Lucas or anyone else take that away from me. After Olivia's bombshell, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Caleb's face, his laugh, his tiny hand in mine. He wasn't just my son, he was my world. Nothing would change that, not biology, not Lucas, not Olivia's lies. But I couldn't let this fester. Lucas had been circling my family like a vulture for years, and I wasn't going to let him destroy what little stability Caleb had left. The next morning, as Olivia slept upstairs, I called Carl, the private investigator. I need you to dig deeper into Lucas, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos in my mind. I need to know everything, his personal life, his connections, his weaknesses. If he so much as jaywalked, I want to know about it. Carl agreed without hesitation, promising to have a full report by the end of the week. In the meantime, I kept my focus on the kids. Sophie and Caleb didn't know about the storm raging between me and Olivia, and I intended to keep it that way. We went to the park, built forts in the living room, and ate ice cream for dinner on Friday. For a few precious hours, it almost felt like normal. But Olivia was distant, her guilt hanging over her like a storm cloud. She barely spoke to me unless it was about the kids, and when she did, her voice was tinged with an unspoken plea for forgiveness. I ignored it. I wasn't ready to forgive, and I wasn't sure I ever would be. By the time Carl called with the results of his investigation, my anger toward Lucas had crystallized into something colder, more focused. You're going to want to sit down for this, Carl said. I braced myself as he detailed everything. Lucas wasn't just a serial manipulator. He was a predator. He'd had inappropriate relationships with multiple colleagues, using his position of power to lure them in, and then discarding them when things got complicated. Rachel's departure wasn't the first or the last, but the real kicker came at the end of Carl's report. Lucas has a wife, Carl said. I nearly dropped the phone. A wife? Yep, Carl replied. Her name's Valerie. They've been married for 12 years, no kids. She works in finance and seems pretty oblivious to Lucas's extracurricular activities. But here's the interesting part. He's got her name on everything. Their house, their bank accounts, even the business he runs with Olivia. If he goes down, she's going down with him. The information hit me like a freight train. Lucas wasn't just Olivia's business partner or her confidant. He was a professional liar, someone who built his entire life on deception. Does she know about Olivia? I asked. I doubt it, Carl said. From what I can tell, Lucas is careful. He keeps his affairs compartmentalized. I hung up, my mind racing. Lucas wasn't just a threat to my marriage. He was a threat to everything Olivia had built. If she thought she could protect him, she was sorely mistaken. That evening, as the kids played upstairs, I turned to Olivia. Does Lucas's wife know about you? I asked bluntly. Her eyes widened, and she froze. What are you talking about? I know he's married, Olivia. I know everything. She slumped into a chair, burying her face in her hands. I didn't know at first, she whispered. When I found out, I was already too deep. I didn't want to ruin his life. Or mine. I shook my head, disgusted. You're still protecting him. Even now. Do you even realize what he's done to you? To Rachel? To who knows how many other women? She didn't respond, her silence more damning than any confession. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice cold. You're going to cut ties with Lucas completely. No meetings, no emails, no phone calls. And if I so much as hear his name again, I'm going straight to his wife. Olivia looked up, her face pale. You wouldn't try me, I said. She didn't argue. For the first time, I felt like I was regaining control. Lucas might have infiltrated my family, but he wasn't going to win. And as I watched Olivia retreat upstairs, I realized something else. This wasn't just about Lucas anymore. It was about rebuilding my life on my terms for my sake and for Caleb and Sophie. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Lucas proved he wasn't going down without a fight. A week after my confrontation with Olivia, I received an envelope in the mail. It wasn't the usual pile of bills or junk mail. It was thick, official-looking, and addressed specifically to me. I tore it open, my heart sinking as I read the contents. A petition for custody rights. Lucas was claiming paternity of Caleb and demanding visitation. I sat down, the letter shaking in my hands. This couldn't be real. Caleb was my son in every way that mattered. He didn't even know Lucas existed beyond being Mom's boss. But now Lucas wanted to insert himself into our lives, as if he had any right to. Olivia walked in just as I finished reading, her face blanching when she saw the letter. "What's that?" she asked, already sounding guilty. I held it up, my voice ice cold. Lucas is petitioning for custody of Caleb. Care to explain how he even found out he's the father? Her hand flew to her mouth. I didn't tell him. I swear, Ethan, I didn't. Then how the hell does he know? I snapped, my anger boiling over. She shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. I don't know. Maybe he figured it out. Or maybe, she stopped herself, looking terrified. Maybe what? I demanded. She hesitated, then whispered. Maybe he found out from Carl. Your investigator. My blood ran cold. Carl wouldn't. I trailed off, but doubt began creeping in. I'd trusted Carl to dig into Lucas's life. But had he tipped him off about Caleb's paternity? I'll find out, I said, grabbing my phone and stepping into the other room. Carl answered on the second ring. Ethan, what's up? Did you say anything to Lucas? I asked bluntly. He paused, and my heart sank. Look, Ethan, I didn't mean for it to happen. Lucas caught wind that someone was digging into his background. He approached me, offered money for information. I didn't tell him much, just enough to make him back off. Are you serious? I hissed, my voice trembling with rage. You told him about Caleb? I didn't think it would escalate like this, Carl said defensively. I was trying to protect you. Lucas isn't someone you want as an enemy. Well, congratulations, I snapped. You just made him my biggest one. I hung up, my hands shaking. Carl had betrayed me, and now Lucas was using the information to rip apart my family. That night, Olivia and I sat at the kitchen table, trying to figure out our next move. For the first time in weeks, we were on the same side, united by our shared fear of what Lucas might do. We can't let him win, Olivia said, her voice trembling. He's not going to, I said firmly. I'll fight this with everything I have. The next morning, I called my lawyer, laying out the entire situation. He doesn't have a leg to stand on, she said confidently. You've been Caleb's legal father since birth, and he's never been involved in his life. The courts will prioritize what's best for the child, and that's staying with you. Her reassurance helped, but I knew better than to underestimate Lucas. He was manipulative, calculating, and resourceful, and he wasn't going to back down easily. Over the next few weeks, I prepared for the fight of my life. I gathered evidence of my role as Caleb's father, documented every moment we'd spent together, and prepared to face Lucas in court. But as I looked at Caleb and Sophie, playing together in the backyard, I knew one thing for certain. No matter how ugly this got, I wasn't going to let Lucas tear us apart. The courtroom was colder than I expected. The stark fluorescent lights and the quiet shuffle of papers made the stakes feel even higher. Lucas was seated at the plaintiff's table, looking smug and composed. Olivia sat beside me at the defense table, her face pale and drawn. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment. My lawyer had built a solid case. I had been Caleb's father in every meaningful way, and introducing Lucas into his life now would only cause confusion and instability. But deep down, I knew Lucas wouldn't play fair. When the judge entered, the proceedings began quickly. Lucas's lawyer painted him as a concerned biological father who simply wanted to be a part of Caleb's life. He spun a tale of remorse and responsibility, making Lucas look like a saint rather than the manipulative liar he was. Then it was our turn. My lawyer presented our evidence, detailing my role in Caleb's life and the potential harm Lucas's sudden involvement could cause. She cited psychological studies, referenced precedent cases, and even introduced character witnesses who testified to my involvement as a loving and present father. But just as I started to feel a glimmer of hope, Lucas's team made their move. "Your Honor," his lawyer said, standing with an air of triumph. "We'd like to call a surprise witness to the stand, Carl Henderson." My stomach dropped. Carl, the investigator I had hired, the man who was supposed to be on my side. I turned to my lawyer, who looked as blindsided as I felt. "Objection," she said. "This witness wasn't disclosed during discovery." The judge frowned but allowed it. "Proceed," he said, clearly displeased by the tactic. Carl took the stand, looking nervous but determined. As Lucas's lawyer began questioning him, it quickly became clear why he was there. "Mr. Henderson," the lawyer said smoothly, "isn't it true that my client, Lucas Whitman, only became aware of his biological connection to Caleb through your investigation?" Carl shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, that's true. And isn't it also true that Mr. Whitman expressed genuine concern for Caleb's well-being during your conversations?" "I suppose," Carl mumbled. I felt rage boiling inside me. This man, who I had trusted to protect my family, was now helping Lucas tear it apart. But the worst was yet to come. Lucas's lawyer leaned in, her voice dripping with calculated malice. "One final question, Mr. Henderson. During your investigation, did you uncover any instances where Mr. Cross," she gestured to me, "acted inappropriately or irresponsibly toward Caleb or his family?" Carl hesitated, glancing at me before answering. There were moments when Mr. Cross expressed anger and frustration. He mentioned feeling trapped in his marriage and overwhelmed by his responsibilities. "That'll do," the lawyer said, turning to the judge with a satisfied smile. The implication hung in the air like a dark cloud. They were trying to paint me as an unstable parent, using my private frustrations as ammunition. When court adjourned for the day, I felt like I'd been gutted. Olivia tried to say something, but I brushed past her, needing air. Later that night, as I sat in the darkness of my living room, the weight of everything pressed down on me. Lucas had turned my own investigator against me, twisting the narrative to suit his agenda. But as I thought about Caleb's smile, the way he called me dad without hesitation, I knew I couldn't give up. The fight wasn't over. The next day, I was preparing for what felt like an uphill battle in court when the unexpected happened. Olivia, who had been distant and defensive throughout this ordeal, sat across from me at the kitchen table, her hands trembling. "I need to say something," she began, her voice unsteady. I folded my arms, waiting for the inevitable excuses or justifications. "Go ahead." She took a deep breath, her eyes brimming with tears. "I know I've made mistakes, huge mistakes, but I can't stand by and let Lucas win. He's not doing this for Caleb. He's doing it to hurt you and me." Her words took me off guard. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'll testify against him," she said, her voice stronger now. "I'll tell the court everything about his manipulation, his past affairs, his lies. Whatever it takes to protect Caleb." I stared at her, searching for any sign of ulterior motives, but all I saw was determination. For the first time in a long time, Olivia looked like the woman I'd married, the woman who would do anything for her family. "Why now?" I asked cautiously. Her gaze dropped to the table. "Because I've been so consumed with guilt that I couldn't see how much damage I've done. But when I saw Caleb last night, playing with Sophie, laughing like nothing was wrong, I realized what's at stake. He doesn't deserve to lose you, and I don't want to be the reason he does." Her words hit me hard, stirring a mix of anger, relief, and something I couldn't quite name. "I'll hold you to that," I said finally. True to her word, Olivia sat down with my lawyer that afternoon and laid everything out. Lucas's inappropriate behavior, his history with Rachel and other women, and his calculated attempts to worm his way into her life. But the real bombshell came when she revealed the details of a secret Lucas had confided in her years ago. "He's not as financially stable as he pretends to be," Olivia said. "He's drowning in debt. The business looks successful on the surface, but it's barely staying afloat. If he loses his wife's financial backing, he's done." My lawyer's eyes lit up. "This could be significant. If we can demonstrate that his custody petition is motivated by financial desperation rather than genuine care for Caleb, the judge will see right through him." It wasn't the smoking gun we needed, but it was close. Back in court, Olivia took the stand, and her testimony shifted the tide in ways I hadn't anticipated. She spoke calmly and honestly about her relationship with Lucas, owning up to her mistakes while exposing his manipulative nature. "Lucas doesn't care about Caleb," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "This isn't about being a father. This is about control. He's trying to punish me for ending our relationship, and he's using my family to do it." Lucas glared at her from the plaintiff's table, his composed facade cracking for the first time. When Olivia stepped down, I couldn't stop myself from whispering, "Thank you." She nodded, her expression unreadable. That evening, as we waited for the judge's ruling, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: hope. The next morning, the ruling came down. The judge denied Lucas's petition for custody, citing his lack of involvement in Caleb's life and evidence that his motivations were not in the child's best interest. Lucas stormed out of the courtroom, his carefully constructed image in shambles. For the first time, I felt like we'd won a battle in this war. But the fight for my family wasn't over yet. The courtroom victory brought a sense of relief I hadn't felt in months. Lucas was out of our lives, legally at least, and Caleb would never have to know the chaos that had swirled around him. But as I stood outside the courthouse, watching Olivia stare at the ground, I knew the battle hadn't fixed everything. "Thank you," I said finally, breaking the silence, "for what you said in there." She looked up at me, her eyes tired. "I owed you that. I owed Caleb that." We drove home separately, and for the first time in weeks, the house felt strangely quiet. No arguments, no accusations, just the lingering echoes of everything that had happened. Over the next few days, Olivia started making changes. She canceled her business partnership with Lucas, announcing her intention to dissolve the firm entirely. She spent more time with the kids, reading to Sophie before bed and teaching Caleb how to bake cookies. But I kept my distance, unsure if her efforts were genuine or just a way to ease her guilt. One evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, she approached me hesitantly. "Ethan, can we talk?" I glanced at her, then nodded. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I've broken something that can't be fixed. But I want you to know I'm trying, not to win you back, but to be better for the kids. And for myself." Her words caught me off guard. For months, I'd felt like I was fighting this battle alone, carrying the weight of her betrayal while she avoided accountability. But now, for the first time, she seemed to understand the gravity of what she'd done. "I appreciate that," I said cautiously. "But it's going to take time, if it's even possible, to rebuild any kind of trust." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "I know. I just want you to know I'm not giving up on this family." Her sincerity left me conflicted. Part of me wanted to shut her out completely, to move on and leave the pain behind. But another part, a quieter, more hopeful part, wondered if redemption was possible after all. The kids at least seemed happier. Caleb's tantrums grew less frequent, and Sophie started talking about school projects and soccer practice with her usual enthusiasm. They were thriving in the stability I'd fought so hard to protect. As Olivia continued to make amends, I found myself softening, bit by bit. She volunteered for every school event, made dinner every night, and even suggested family counseling, a step I hadn't expected her to take. "Maybe it's worth a try," I said one evening, surprising even myself. "Really?" she asked, her face lighting up. "Don't read too much into it," I replied. "But if it helps the kids, it's worth doing." The first session was awkward, filled with long silences and forced politeness. But as the weeks went on, something shifted. We started talking, not just about the past, but about what we wanted for the future. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't easy, but it was a start. Just as things seemed to be settling down, life threw another curveball our way. It was a quiet Saturday morning. Sophie was upstairs FaceTiming a friend, and Caleb and I were building a Lego spaceship at the kitchen table. Olivia had just stepped out to run errands, leaving the house feeling unusually calm. The knock at the door shattered that peace. I opened it, expecting a delivery driver or a neighbor. Instead, I found myself face to face with a woman I didn't recognize. She was tall, with sharp features and dark hair pulled into a neat ponytail. She wore a tailored blazer and carried a small leather bag. "Ethan Cross?" she asked, her voice clipped. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "I'm Valerie Whitman," she said, her words cutting through me like a blade. "Lucas's wife." For a moment, I was too stunned to respond. Of all the people I expected to see at my door, she was at the bottom of the list. "Can I come in?" she asked, her tone leaving little room for argument. I stepped aside, still reeling, and gestured for her to sit. She declined, standing stiffly in the middle of the living room like a soldier on a mission. "I'm not here to cause trouble," she said, her gaze steady. "I just need answers." "Answers to what?" I asked, crossing my arms. "To why my husband has been obsessed with your wife and your family," she said bluntly. Her directness caught me off guard. "Obsessed?" She nodded, pulling a folder from her bag. "I've known about Lucas's affairs for years," she admitted. "It's a pattern. He fixates on women, uses them until they're no longer useful, and then moves on. But with Olivia, it was different. He wasn't just infatuated with her. He wanted her life. Your life." My stomach churned as she handed me the folder. Inside were emails, photos, and even journal entries. Evidence that Lucas had been monitoring Olivia for years, long before their business partnership began. "He talked about your family constantly," Valerie continued. "About how perfect it was. He used to say that if things had been different, it could have been his. He even talked about Caleb, though I didn't understand why at the time." I clenched my fists, struggling to process what I was hearing. Lucas hadn't just been meddling in my marriage. He'd been trying to replace me entirely. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my voice tight. "Because I'm leaving him," she said firmly. "And I thought you deserved to know the truth. Lucas is dangerous, Ethan. He doesn't take rejection well. He's not going to let this go." Her words sent a chill down my spine. "What do you mean? Dangerous?" I asked. She hesitated, then sighed. "He's been arrested twice for stalking former colleagues. He always managed to sweep it under the rug, but he's relentless. If he feels like he's lost control, he'll do whatever it takes to regain it." I stared at her, the weight of her warnings sinking in. "Why didn't you come forward earlier?" "Because I was afraid," she admitted. "But I can't stand by anymore. If Lucas tries anything, you need to be ready." Before I could respond, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway made us both turn. Olivia was back. Valerie grabbed her bag, heading for the door. "Don't tell him we spoke," she said urgently. "And Ethan, be careful." She was gone before Olivia stepped inside, her arms full of groceries. "Who was that?" Olivia asked, glancing over her shoulder. I hesitated, then shook my head. "No one important." But as I watched Olivia unpack the groceries, my mind raced with possibilities. Valerie's warning wasn't just about Lucas. It was about the lengths he might go to if he felt cornered. And something told me this wasn't over yet. Valerie's visit had shaken me to my core. Her warning about Lucas lingered like a shadow over the next few days. I couldn't stop thinking about his obsession with Olivia, the stalking arrests, and the eerie way he had tried to embed himself into my family's life. I didn't tell Olivia right away, partly because I didn't want to alarm her, and partly because I didn't know how to explain it without sounding paranoid. But when a strange car started parking near the house, always the same car, always at odd hours, I knew I couldn't stay silent. One evening, after the kids were asleep, I told Olivia everything. "Valerie came to see me," I said, keeping my voice low. Her eyes widened. "Lucas's wife?" I nodded. She told me about his past. The stalking charges, his obsession with you, everything. And now, there's this car that's been sitting outside the house. I think it's him. Olivia's face went pale, and she glanced toward the window, as if expecting to see Lucas standing there. "What do we do?" "We call the police," I said firmly, "and we make sure he knows we're not afraid of him." The next morning, I reported the car to the police. They sent an officer to take a statement, but without direct evidence, there wasn't much they could do. Still, the officer promised to keep an eye on the neighborhood, which gave me some peace of mind. But Lucas wasn't the kind of man to back down easily. 2 days later, I came home from work to find Olivia pacing the living room, her phone clutched in her hand. "He called me," she said, her voice shaking. "What did he say?" I demanded. "He was calm at first," she replied, her eyes darting nervously. "But then he started saying things like, 'You can't erase me, and you'll never be rid of me.' My blood boiled. That's it. We're getting a restraining order." That evening, I met with my lawyer and filed the necessary paperwork. It wouldn't stop Lucas entirely, but it would give us legal recourse if he tried anything else. The next confrontation came sooner than I expected. It was late at night, and the house was quiet. I was in the kitchen cleaning up when I heard the unmistakable crunch of gravel outside. I looked out the window and saw Lucas standing in the driveway, his silhouette illuminated by the streetlight. My heart raced as I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. "What are you doing here, Lucas?" I called through the door, keeping my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. He smirked, stepping closer. "Just thought I'd pay you a visit, Ethan. You've been making things complicated for me." I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to open the door and confront him directly. "Leave now, or you'll regret it." He laughed, a low, mocking sound. "What are you going to do? Call the cops? Go ahead. I'm not on your property yet." The sound of approaching sirens cut through the tension like a knife. Lucas's smirk faltered, and he stepped back, his hands raised in mock surrender. "This isn't over," he said quietly before turning and disappearing into the night. The police arrived moments later, but Lucas was already gone. I filed another report, but the encounter left me shaken. It was clear that Lucas wouldn't stop until he felt like he'd won. Back inside, Olivia hugged herself, her face pale. "What if he comes back?" "He won't," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure. "Next time, he won't just be dealing with the police. He'll be dealing with me." As I checked the locks and turned off the lights, I realized that this fight was no longer just about Caleb or Olivia. It was about protecting the life I'd fought so hard to build, and I wasn't going to let Lucas take it from me. In the days following Lucas's midnight visit, the tension in our home was palpable. The kids, thankfully, were oblivious to the danger that had been looming over us, but Olivia and I were on edge. Every unexpected noise, every passing car, made us jump. I wasn't going to live in fear. I hired a security company to install cameras and motion-activated lights around the house. I also worked with the police to file a harassment complaint against Lucas, bolstered by Olivia's testimony and the records of his previous stalking arrests. Then came the call that changed everything. "Mr. Cross," the officer said, "we picked up Lucas Whitman earlier today. He was caught trespassing on another property and had a weapon in his car. He's being held without bail." The relief that washed over me was overwhelming. Lucas was finally out of the picture, and for the first time in months, I felt like we could breathe again. Over the following weeks, life began to normalize. The kids went back to their routines. Olivia and I started family counseling in earnest, and the specter of Lucas's presence faded into the background. But even as the dust settled, the cracks in my marriage remained. One evening, after the kids were asleep, Olivia and I sat down at the kitchen table. "We need to talk about what happens next," I said. She nodded, her expression serious. "I know we can't go back to the way things were, but I want to know if there's any part of you that thinks we can move forward." I hesitated, searching for the right words. "I think we can co-parent effectively. I think we can be there for Sophie and Caleb. But as for us," I trailed off, shaking my head. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't argue. "I understand," she said softly. "I broke your trust. I can't expect you to rebuild something that I destroyed." It was the most honest thing she'd said in months. The divorce was amicable. We agreed to share custody of the kids, and Olivia sold her stake in the marketing firm to cover the legal costs. She found a new job, far removed from Lucas and the life she'd built with him, and we began the slow process of creating a new normal for our family. For me, the journey was just beginning. I threw myself into being the best father I could be, making sure Sophie and Caleb felt loved and supported despite the changes in their lives. I also started focusing on myself, therapy, reconnecting with old friends, and even taking up running again, something I hadn't done in years. Looking back, I can see how easy it is to miss the signs of trouble when you're caught up in the daily grind of life. I ignored the little warning signals in my marriage, convincing myself that things would work themselves out. By the time I realized how far we drifted apart, the damage had already been done. But I've also learned some valuable lessons. 1. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't ignore your gut, and don't be afraid to ask hard questions. 2. Communication is everything. So many of the issues in my marriage stem from a lack of honest communication. If you're not talking, you're not growing. 3. Boundaries matter. Whether it's in relationships or friendships, boundaries are essential. Lucas was able to manipulate Olivia because she didn't set clear limits, and I didn't address my concerns sooner. 4. Strength comes from support. I couldn't have navigated this mess without the support of people who stood by me, friends, family, and even professionals like my lawyer and therapist. 5. It's okay to let go. Not every relationship is meant to last forever. Sometimes, letting go is the healthiest and strongest thing you can do. Today, I'm in a better place. The pain of betrayal hasn't completely faded, but it no longer controls me. I've built a life that feels stable, honest, and fulfilling, not just for me, but for my kids. As for Olivia, we're on cordial terms. She's working on herself, and I hope she finds peace in her own way. To anyone reading this who's faced betrayal or loss, you're stronger than you think. The road ahead might feel impossible, but with time and effort, you'll find your way forward. Thanks for listening.